Hi there, and welcome back to 19th century art. In this lecture, we're going to look at the extraordinary life and influence of Napoleon on the art of France. To begin with, Napoleon's life was something extraordinary, and there was all kinds of propaganda boosting him as this genius, as this Übermensch, as this Superman. And in reality, across the pond, as they like to say, in Britain, they thought not too highly of this extravagant man who had this overweening ego. Here we see a cartoon toward the end of Napoleon's life by Louis Marx, and in it we call it The Progress of Boni, short for Bonaparte. And in a simple stick figure way, it depicts all the great battles and exploits of Napoleon, and it is really remarkable. But again, as you sort of reduce it down to a little strip of action by stick figures, it all looks kind of fuss and bother over nothing. But in reality, Napoleon was really extraordinary, and he had an incredible influence on the life and culture of Europe. And his story is truly memorable and remarkable. There are about 180 movies about Napoleon, including the most recent one that came out last year, and there are about 75 of them listed on Wikipedia. It is estimated there are more movies about Napoleon than just about any other person besides Count Dracula. So yeah, there's a lot to his story to make a movie about. Here, let's just get an idea of his military prowess and his capture of Europe. The bright red area centered around France, that is what he was chiefly responsible for. Then his brother was in the orange area in Spain, and then his brother-in-law was the pink area, and the yellow were satellite states swearing loyalty to Napoleon, and that's in 1810, but very soon he would just sweep through all that on his failed approach to the Russian Empire. The extraordinary legends surrounding Napoleon, his larger-than-life image, was a subject of great paintings. Here, Jacques-Louis David is flattering this new general with this very extraordinary portrait of Napoleon crossing the Alps. This was his campaign into Italy, and he caught the Italians entirely off guard by moving his troops over the treacherous passes of the Alps, sweeping down into Italy, where he was literally unopposed. In this famous painting, we see Napoleon charging forward, leading his men through this very heroic picture. Now, what's really extraordinary about this is David came to Bonaparte and wanted to paint this picture, and he asked if he would sit for him. And Napoleon demurred. He said, "For what? What good? Do you think the great many men of antiquity whom we have images ever sat for their portrait? You just have to make me look like a great person, and everyone know it'll be me." And David said, "Yes, but there are people here who actually know what you look like. Wouldn't you like it to have some resemblance?" And to that, Napoleon lost his temper and says, "Isn't the exactness of the features a wart on the nose which gives resemblance? It is the character that dictates what must be painted. Nobody knows the portraits of great men resemble this. It is enough that their genius lives there." When Napoleon refused to sit for his portrait, he was in effect arguing that David should return to verisimilitude rather than realism. David decided to make sure we knew this was a portrait of Bonaparte. He actually wrote his name in the rocks below, alongside the great generals who had also marched into Italy over the Alps. You see the name of Hannibal there. Now, I would take a break from our looking at the French Revolution art and see how this image has been interpreted in the present. Kehinde Wiley has taken his own interpretation of this famous painting and brought a fairly anonymous black man into the composition. And he is calling attention to the idea that, again, the power to make these paintings is really part of the history of the past, that we bring these people and celebrate them because they had access to painters who were willing to do this for them. And so Kehinde Wiley is really trying to bring access and celebrate greatness, or show the hollowness of what greatness paintings is all about. He brings in this decorative part that is like a tapestry in the royal background. But if you look very closely into the tapestry, there's all this little squirming sperm swimming through the back of the painting. And he's also included the name of his model for this painting, Williams above Bonaparte. Now, I want to show you another interesting fiction about this painting. When we look at horse and rider paintings and you want to celebrate the rider over the horse, you have to sort of shrink down the horse to do that. Otherwise, the horse takes center focus. It becomes a painting about a horse with a person on it. And so I point this out because there's a lot of fictionalization that goes into these paintings and their extravagant gestures and their stormy skies and all of that besides. About 50 years later, another painting of this historic moment was rendered in a more realistic style by Paul Delaroche in 1850. And in Delaroche's painting, he takes the idea that the act and the heroism and the genius of Napoleon is not served by dressing it up in all this fiction, that the simple fact of what Napoleon did on a mule going through the Alps was itself really remarkable. So here we have a probably closer resemblance to Napoleon, and it shows us this gesture that he is most famous for doing. If anyone ever asks you in a game of charades, depict Napoleon, they stuff their hand in their shirt like this. It seems to be the iconic gesture of Napoleon. And what is that all about? What is his right hand doing in his vest? Well, some people said it's possible he had some kind of stomach ulcer, and that's not true. It's more likely that it is a part of this heroic gesture. It's a man with the hand held in was a common stance for a man of breeding. In 1738, Mr. Manners of that era wrote a book of genteel behavior. The hand inside the vest pose signified manly boneness tempered with modesty. So it's a symbolic pose that Napoleon himself probably actually performed. Because David had ingratiated Napoleon with his painting and flattered Napoleon with his painting of him crossing the Alps, he was commissioned to paint Napoleon's coronation, which was this absolutely spectacular event held in Paris. It took Jacques-Louis David 3 years to make this painting that is 20 feet in height and 32 feet in length. It is a monumental painting, extraordinary skill, and yet it's so still. The colors, the vibrancy, there's a stillness to it, as if history is in the making. Now, at the coronation, there was a really important moment in this coronation. The Pope was there on the invitation of Napoleon. The Pope blessed the royal regalia. And then Napoleon did not want to be crowned by someone else. He literally grabbed the crown from the Pope and placed it on his own head. And this was like, I am the master of my own destiny. And this was a very dramatic moment. And originally, in Jacques-Louis David's painting, this was the moment he wanted to represent. But Napoleon asked him to change it to this later moment when he is actually crowning his queen, Josephine. And so this is a really interesting. It's much more calm. It's much more reserved. There's a delicacy to this moment, a quietness to it. And I think part of its power is its restraint. You can see here the incredible detail lavished upon all the costumes of the court ladies and court gentlemen. At this time, a new artist was gaining recognition, a student of David, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. And Ingres was an incredible master of anatomy and composition. He was more dramatic. He wanted to create a kind of fleshy power in his paintings. I find them more emotional in some ways. And he brings about this transformation. Here is the painting he used to gain access to the Art Academy. It was shown at the Salon of 1801. Now, Ingres was an extraordinary classicist, and he really believed that what you need to know to be a great painter is in the past. As he wrote, "Our task is not to invent, but to continue as we have enough to do if, following the examples of the masters, we utilize those innumerable types which nature constantly offers us, if we interpret them with wholehearted sincerity and ennoble them through that pure and firm style without which no work has beauty." That pure and firm style, that's the classical style that he is bringing to his work. He is ennobling nature. He's bringing it out of its dross of being just merely ordinary, and yet he's kind of bringing it into the alignment with the classical past. For many years, Ingres gained notoriety as a portrait artist, and he spent a great deal of time really walking door to door, drawing whatever middle class or noble person would sit for him. And there really hundreds and hundreds of drawings he did. Some 450 of his drawings survive. And they're really quite lovely. The delicacy and the elegance of his line work is truly astounding. Ingres had his own opportunity to paint Napoleon. He was commissioned by an Italian institution to show Napoleon as the king of Italy. And instead, he represented him as God the Father, as emperor of the whole universe. And this did not go too well with his Italian patrons. And so it was taken up by the Corps Legislatif in Paris. Here you can see the basis for his work was this Jan van Eyck God the Father panel from the Hent altarpiece. You can see the similarity in the powerful forward frontal gesture and the way that one staff across his lap is holding the very hand gesture that is in the painting. Now, Napoleon's hubris was certainly going to get the best of him. And in his failed effort to capture Russia, he sent forward some 680,000 soldiers and marched all the way to Moscow with tremendous losses. And the Russians really initially put up a strong defense, but then merely retreated and burned the fields behind them, so that Napoleon's soldiers had nothing to live on. And then they got to Moscow, and the city was empty. There was nobody there. There was nothing to conquer, and winter was coming on, and they were being attacked on all sides. And so Napoleon decides to beat a hasty retreat. And you can see the black line, his retreat, where his numbers grow ever smaller and smaller. A small force had been left behind as reinforcements, but again, crossings, river, many of them died, disappeared. And in the end of this extraordinary military debacle, he had less than 27,000 effective soldiers in his army. And this was the beginning of the original end of Napoleon. The story is complicated, but many people have looked at this graphic under the assumption that it was really winter and cold, and that graph at the bottom is showing the plunging temperature and how they correlate with increasing deaths along the march. When in fact, actually lice and dysentery played an equal, if not more important role in the decimation of his military forces. As a final coda to this extraordinary man, Antonio Canova was asked to make a sculpture of Napoleon, and he convinced the Academy that the way to truly honor Napoleon was to do him in the nude, in this grand classical style. Now, when we see the sculpture, there's something a little bit over the top about it. Okay, yes, it's a very finely rendered classical figure, but anyone who knows Napoleon, he was kind of paunchy and short, and this is nothing at all like Napoleon. And then there's the title of this work, Napoleon as Mars the Peacemaker. And again, this is a contradiction because Mars is not the peacemaker. Mars is the god of war. And just like Napoleon claimed when he was charging into Italy, he claimed he was coming in peace, like many warmongers do. This statue was in Napoleon's closet for a number of years. Eventually, the next French king sold it to the British after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo. Duke of Wellington was gifted this statue. The Duke of Wellington was the general who played a decisive role in the overthrow of Napoleon, and he was very happy to keep this extraordinary statue in his vestibule in his home in London.